On today's episode of Best Friends at Work, Naomi, Mel, and I speak with Chris Rollins, a leadership expert and keynote speaker who transforms small actions into lasting effects that builds trust and connection. We dive into his ripple effect leadership framework and discuss how feeling seen and heard at work not only drives engagement and retention, but it also drives performance and profitability. Early in our discussion, he shares some amazing data that highlights the priority all leaders must take on their people strategy.
But I don't know, I remain really optimistic and hopeful that the true leaders who really are committed to making their companies profitable and successful through all this uncertainty and change are really starting to understand that that taking care of their people first is how we then take care of our customers and our employees and our guests and our patients in whatever the industry that it is. And I just think it's all of our responsibility to be the ones that are out here leading and showing what that actually looks like. And there's a company called Quantum Connections. They're doing this amazing research right now on what they call the Net Connected score. And they're interviewing, they did a study recently with 12,000 employees in 49 different industries. And they asked a question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how seen and heard do you feel by your direct supervisor? So you both, two of you were at my talk, and you know that I talk a lot about being seen and heard and safe, seen and heard. And even in my work, I've had to sort of like check myself, like, is this too soft? Like, are people getting this? Like, you know, but I deeply believe in my bones that matters. And it's really amazing to see what they're finding, which is that teams that have people who feel more seen and heard by their supervisor are 55% more likely to contribute ideas, 44% more likely to admit mistakes, 39% more likely to take calculated risks. And when they talk about fully connected teams versus fully disconnected teams, and we're talking about this idea of feeling safe, seen, and heard, human connection, they found that fully connected workplaces experience 38.7% more profitability than fully disconnected teams. So you can talk about how, oh, like your feelings don't matter, or just suck it up and do the work, and you just need to do your job, and why do we have to do all this? It's like back in the day, it was a lot easier. People just got their job done and went home. That's just, the data's not even supporting that anymore. So I think we have to tell our stories and lead by example, and also bring forward some data for those that are skeptical about it, and show that this really, really matters.
Stick around as he shares key insights and actions that all leaders must take. More importantly, he shares his own personal journey and its impact. We were almost rendered speechless by the end of our time together. So powerful. We know you'll love this episode. Stay to the end. You won't want to miss it. I'm Lorin Mask. Please join me and my best friends at work, Naomi Lippin and Mel Boyd Brown, where we invite experts to talk about work, life, and leadership, and how to do them better.
Hello, everyone.
How are you guys doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are the two of you?
You know, I am just very contemplative these days. There's just so much going on in the world, and I'm at the time we're recording this, it's still like late spring, early spring, mid-spring. I don't know what you would consider it. Tired of the cold. Rain.
Been pretty rainy and gloomy here. Look, I'm wearing a turtleneck. So you would think it's like February. Meanwhile, it's almost mid-April. But I will say this morning when I was taking our dog Henry out, what lifts my spirit is seeing the daffodils. because I feel like they are these brave little rays of sunshine,
Yeah.
despite, right? Because they're like determined
They're
to be,
coming out.
but and they're really out, and even in the rain. And I contrast that with the magnolias, which are also coming out, but are much more fragile. And so in this type of weather, there are trees that don't even last a day because it's windy and it's rainy, and that's it. Man, those daffodils, they hang
Hanging
in
on.
there,
They're
right?
hanging on for dear
So
life. Like I'm a little wilty now, but I'm coming back.
they're very it's interesting for me. They're really they have been very uplifting.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm wondering if these flowers are a nice metaphor of some sort at some point. Like, let me
Well, they
make a
are for
mental note.
me.
Let me make a mental note because maybe we can turn that into something.
Well, I think, for me anyway,
Hmm.
paying attention to what's around me in the natural world has always been a source of sometimes inspiration, sometimes solace.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that, Naomi, actually. For me, there's something about being in nature that's very soothing.
I was
Mhm.
on my LinkedIn yesterday, obviously posting about our latest drop in episode. And someone I've known for quite a long time was commenting about how she dreaded a day-long online retreat with their team. She thought, oh, this is going to be horrible and yada yada. But at some point, they all went on a nature walk. I guess they took their phones with them and stayed on the meeting or something. I couldn't quite get it clear, but I know at some point either they went on a nature walk and then came back, or they went on a nature walk together and continued the meeting. And she talked about how wonderful it was. It was like kind of like a walking, talking meeting.
Yeah.
And I've done that before. Um, and I don't do it enough. And I feel like we should promote the work. Remember when you were a little kid and you got to go outside for class? Right? There was
Mhm.
just something intellectually stimulating about it. It's like kind of changing your environment, kind of. So you made me think of that, Naomi and Mel, about how we can get so wrapped up in work and we forget that we need to stay connected. Oh, as the kids would say, touch grass, right?
Yeah. I have a couple
Mm.
of colleagues in Europe who integrate like outdoor work as part of their leadership development programs with clients.
Hmm.
Like they'll go, like part of the program will be walking and talking through the woods, for example, or doing labyrinths. Um, I have never experimented yet with that with clients, but I'm deeply intrigued by it. And they said it really changes the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And that, we could do, we could do that. You
Sure.
could
We
do
could do
that.
that.
You
We could
could
take
do that.
our
I
podcast
mean,
and walk.
I don't know about the podcast, but we could certainly, I'm not sure about that. That might be a little,
There
but
might be some noise in
we
the
could,
background.
Yeah, we'd have just have
okay,
really good mics.
but I do think, it's definitely, and, it sort of went, oh, if you're doing any online training or working sessions, why not,
Hmm.
incorporate that? I like that idea. That's great.
All right, we're all taking notes right now. I love where the ideas come from. One never knows, right?
Never
And it's
knows.
interesting because not to segue into our guest, but to segue into our guest. If you think about um, his platform and his what he does his keynote speeches on. Oh my gosh, I can't talk all of a sudden. And his trademarked model is something that reminds me of nature all the time, just because of the name. And I
Mm,
bet, I bet,
yeah.
I bet, like in the brain, there, it does something. I bet because I've been reading a book by Dr. Doty lately called Mind Magic, and they talk about how your mind can't distinguish between things that are real and things that you imagine in your own brain. Your brain actually doesn't necessarily distinguish between the two, and I think that's interesting. So maybe our guest has a little like tap into that that nature thing that could help us out. Shall we
Mm.
introduce him?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's absolutely. Yeah, let's get
I'm so
going.
excited to have him on. Um, Naomi, did you want to read his bio or should I?
Go right ahead, Lauren.
Sure. All right. So our guest is Chris Rollins, and he turns everyday leadership into lasting ripple effects. With 15 years of experience empowering teams and shaping organizational culture, Chris skyrocketed through corporate America to become a top HR exec by the age of 30. I was a
that's yeah.
knucklehead. Well, I'm still a knucklehead, but boy, prior to 30, forget it. His unique ripple effect leadership framework, see, there's the ripples, right? The pond, the nature, inspired by his journey of self-discovery and one particularly fateful conversation with his dad, calls leaders to foster connection and inspire action across their organizations. He's on a mission to bring a more human approach to work that works for every human. Speaking to diverse audience across many industries, Chris delivers an emotionally charged experience that leaves people rethinking the way they connect with colleagues. His message is clear. Start a ripple. Whether a leader or a team member, anyone can be the pebble by taking meaningful action, no matter how small, to create high trust cultures that drive speed, momentum, and scale. He's trusted by top brands across finance, insurance, retail, tech, and he is a fresh voice for leaders ready to break down barriers and inspire lasting change. And his talks have garnered a 98% rating with diverse audience ratings from local repair auto shops to Fortune 50 companies. I love his bio. Naomi and I had the pleasure of seeing him speak at a Society for Human Resources Management conference here in New York last September, and I knew immediately that I thought he'd be a great guest for our podcast. And he had a really big impact on me, so much so that I saved the little rock from his
That
keynote, and it
is
sits on my
cool.
desk every day. And I look at it and touch it. And so he was impactful for me. So I'm excited to have him on. So let's welcome into the room.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I love it. When we were doing our interview for the podcast, hi Chris, I'm telling everyone
I
about
guess
my rock,
Good
my
morning.
pebble that I saved from your keynote when we met. And I was telling them my little story, how it sits on my desk and how I didn't like dig through a bag or a box to find it.
it's
It's
there
it's
where you
there.
see it every day. That's really cool. Chris, that's powerful. That was a year ago.
Yeah, I'm always delighted to hear where the pebbles end up and to hear that people still have them. Recently, someone said they've placed it on their car like dashboard. So every time they drive to work in the morning, it's their like moment of pause and reminder to be a good human when they show up and see their colleagues, regardless of how many, Legos they stepped on that morning or kids that are dragging them down. Like, let me make sure I approach the day with a sense of calm and connection. So yeah, glad to see that.
I
Very
love
cool.
that.
I love
Yeah,
it.
well, welcome to our podcast, our conversation. We're really looking forward to it. And I'm Naomi. Hey,
Nice to meet
Nell,
you.
I'm Mel.
and that's Nell.
Hi, all. Thanks
And
for
of
having me.
course, you've
And
go
you
ahead.
met me already, so we go
So
way back.
we're really pleased to have you, and we'd like to start off as we typically do with many of our podcasts, to have you kind of talk a little bit about kind of this ripple effect, this framework that you've created, and where it comes from.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks again for having me. I was reflecting as I was in the waiting room. The title of your podcast is so lovely, and I was thinking how I'm really in this business. I don't have a full team right now, so it's me and I have a couple sort of part-time folks that I work with. But it did make me reflect on like having a best friend at work and how nice that is. And I miss that a little bit as a sort of solopreneur, if you will. So I love what y'all are doing and again, thanks for having me. So the ripple
Mhm.
effect is it's really a combination of my personal and professional life kind of like all mixed together as I grew up and worked through the corporate world. like sort of refining my principles and what I believe about leadership. And I'll take you back to when I was a kid, and I was obsessed with golf. I grew up about 90 miles north of New York City, in Westchester County. Actually, I think some of you, maybe Lorin, you're from Westchester, right?
Well,
Or
not originally, but I did live there for 10
okay,
years, so I
okay.
know
I noticed the
where you're from.
914 number.
Yeah, it's still my
Mhm.
cell phone is still labeled that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, grew up as an avid golfer. Actually, ended up going to a golf school my junior and senior year of high school because I was like committed to being a pro golfer. Like that was my dream. Ended up getting a scholarship to play Division One in college, and as I'm sure you know, like kind of going from high school to college, a pretty academically demanding school, playing athletics D1 full time, there's just a lot on your plate already. And to add to the mix, I was sort of going through this a self journey of self-discovery. And there's a guy I met on my freshman hall who became a really close friend of mine. His name is Chase. And over the course of freshman year, I just kind of realized that I thought of Chase as more than just a friend, and it freaked me out. And the journey of kind of coming to terms with being gay was really stressful because that was not the life that I imagined for myself. And I think leading up to that moment, I had sort of suppressed all of those feelings. And
Mhm.
so, as I began the process of sharing my truth with my friends, my family, etc., my dad was visiting me at a golf tournament, and I had just made a commitment that I got to tell him because I just kept feeling like our relationship was getting cold because I kept sort of like fudging over details of my personal life, and I wasn't really connecting, and human connection, which we'll talk about, is really important to me. So we're sitting there at dinner at this golf tournament in Georgia, and my heart is in my throat and my chest is pounding, and I'm like, you never know how this is going to go. And I
Mhm.
finally, build up the courage to tell my dad literally the last moment when he's signing the dinner check. And to my surprise, in that moment, he said, "Wow, I'm so proud of you. That's awesome." And I'm like, "What?" Like, you're supposed to be like upset or angry or just like reacting in a really bad way, but he took this moment to pause and like really celebrate me. And we've talked about this a lot since, and certainly he was not expecting that. It was a huge surprise. But that moment, the way he showed up, the way he handled that one conversation really was such a key moment in my life and had a real ripple effect in my life. And that's what I bring back to organizations is how you also can be a leader regardless of your title, regardless of your role, as someone who can create safety and build trust with people and create those kinds of ripple effects for the folks on your team and in your organization. And so that's the sort of story behind the ripple effect. And I'm happy to dive more into the actual framework, but it really is based on this idea of helping people feel safe, seen, and heard so that we can build trust and move things along a lot faster.
I thank
Chris,
you
when
so
you,
much for that
yeah,
Mhm.
story. I love
yeah.
that. And
Mhm.
and it makes me think about this idea that every moment we have this opportunity to create like positive influences of the people around us, right? These ripple effects.
Yeah.
And and yet when we look at the world right now, or like particular organizations, it feels like we're moving away from like relationship-based connections and things are becoming very short-term focused. In the work that I do, I work as a team and leadership coach. I hear a lot of people talking about that it feels like very transactional now, the switch. And I'm wondering, like, what are the kind of small things that we can encourage ourselves and the people that we work with, like, keep leaning into this, keep doing these kind of things. This is what's going to give you the bigger, outsized impact. Like, what would you say to those people that we're talking to?
Yeah, I think part of the macro influence that you're describing is also, I think, the proliferation of AI and
Mm.
how like things happen so quickly. You want an email redrafted, pop it in ChatGPT. You want a new employee onboarding packet, like have ChatGPT write it. Like there's so many things that AI can do that's sort of like it's very transactional, it's very quick. Um, I need to have a tough conversation with my colleague. Ask ChatGPT how to approach the conversation. Like we're kind of putting up more barriers to the human connection And so I think it's a call for all of us to be more thoughtful about how to leverage, and we don't need to get into a whole conversation about AI, but how to leverage technology to actually drive more into our human connection. And I think like in the last 15, 20 years, the need to be more human at work just keeps getting greater and greater and greater as technology becomes more sort of embedded in everything that we do. And so the whole idea around the ripple effect leadership framework is understanding your ripples of impact. And when we talk about like the transactional piece, I tell leaders, they're like, what is your immediate impact? Who are the people that you're immediately influencing? Maybe they're people on your team, maybe that you're people that you're collaborating with, but just like think about all the people in that immediate ripple of impact. And what can you be doing in small moments, like taking a longer time to ask how they're doing. When you sense that something's up, like actually inquire about that. Like you're a coach, you understand that. And then thinking about, well, then what's the indirect impact? So this is sort of like the second layer, right? So not the people necessarily that you're interacting with directly, but if I've got somebody on my team, they've got a family at home, they've got other people that they're working with, there's their whole world, right? And so your leadership is going to be felt through like these multiple ripples of impact, right? And then we got to think about like the next ring, the next ripple of impact, which really is the legacy impact. Like, how do you want to be remembered?
Yeah.
When you leave this company in 2 years or 5 years and 10 years, what are people going to say about the contributions that you made and the impact that you had? And I think that becomes a bit of like a guiding star
Mm.
for how you want to reflect and how you want to show up now in these moments where you do have opportunities to create human connection. And I think it's just a choice. Like it's not easy, but things are moving fast. Absolutely. But we can either choose to have sort of transformational relationships or we can choose to have transactional relationships. And, all the data continues to support the fact that human connection and helping people feel safe, seen, and heard
Yeah.
is how teams and companies perform better.
I love that invitation to slow down, right?
Mm.
For all of us, just to slow down and be in the moment. And I mean, I know that word's overused a lot, but to be present in the moment, versus thinking 3 steps ahead.
Chris, a lot of what you're saying is really resonating with me. And, having, taught leaders for the last 20 plus years, I'm always drawn to the fact that the first folks to sign up for the classes are people who are actually pretty self-aware,
Mm,
are already people who want to improve, are really focused in on, what it takes to be a good leader. And then we, I worked in healthcare a lot, so we could mandate and force people to come to the leadership classes. And those that kind of put that off, there was one of two things going on. Either A, they wanted to come, but their boss was not supportive. Or B, they just felt like they were already good leaders and they don't need to improve. And where I'm leading with this is that I love all this the ideas that you can bring to me, but I'm wondering, how do we reach those? So I'm not being very clear and concise in my question right now because my brain's going 16 different directions.
yeah.
But what I've noticed is the command and control is kind of making its way back. I mean, we've had a big shift in the United States anyway, but that's also, speaking of ripples, affecting the rest of the world. And so there's a lot of, I'm hearing from folks that command and control is kind of starting to come back. And even if you're a leader, you still have a boss, right? So how do you balance the dynamics that are starting to happen again with what you share and what you teach?
Well, yeah, I don't know on what scale, like, I, I definitely think leaders have been emboldened based on perhaps leaders in government that are taking a certain command and control approach.
Mm.
Um, but I don't know, I remain really optimistic and hopeful that the the true leaders who really are committed to making their companies um, profitable and successful through all this uncertainty and change are really starting to understand that that taking care of their people first is how we then take care of our customers and our employees and our guests and our patients and whatever the industry that it is. And I just think it's all of our responsibility to be the ones that are out here leading and showing what that actually looks like. And there's a company called Quantum Connections. They're doing this amazing research right now on what they call the net connected score. And they're interviewing, they did a study recently with 12,000 employees in 49 different industries. And they asked a question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how seen and heard do you feel by your direct supervisor? So you both two of you were at my talk, and you know that I talk a lot about being seen and heard and safe, seen and heard. And even in my work, I've had to sort of like check myself, like, is this too soft? Like, are people getting this? Like, but I deeply believe in my bones that that matters. And it's really amazing to see what they're finding, which is that teams that have people who feel more seen and heard by their supervisor are 55% more likely to contribute ideas, 44% more likely to admit mistakes, 39% more likely to take calculated risks. And when they talk about fully connected teams versus fully disconnected teams, and we're talking about this idea of feeling safe, seen, and heard, human connection, they found that fully connected workplaces experience 38.7% more profitability than fully disconnected teams. So you can talk about how, oh, like your feelings don't matter, or just suck it up and do the work, and you just need to do your job, and why do we have to do all this? It's like back in the day, it was a lot easier. People just got their job done and went home. That's just, the data's not even supporting that anymore. So I think we have to tell our stories and lead by example, and also bring forward some data for those that are skeptical about it, and show that this really, really matters.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that data, Chris. When you were talking, are you familiar with Gallup at all, Chris?
Yeah.
The Gallup company, right? And so when you were talking, it made me think about engagement, employee engagement. So I'm curious what connection you see between what you just described and employee engagement.
Well, I think it's the foundation for employee engagement is human connection. When you feel seen and heard and understood by your direct supervisor, you're way more engaged in your work. You're way more committed to the mission. You're way more willing to go above and beyond. There's just a sense of trust that is built that keeps you connected to the work and connected to the mission. And it just creates that foundational place. And there's, of course, a lot of other, factors and variables that can play into engagement, like how well you're compensated and how fair things are and all of those things. But I think at the foundation, like we're talking about being valued as a human being, being seen and understood. And I'm sure we've all been in a situation in a job, or maybe even a relationship, where that like is getting chipped away at over time, and that is not sustainable.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, Chris, and I'm so aligned, by the way, is that it feels like there are particular behaviors that are going to have outsized effects. And the first is how we establish a sense of safety and trust, first and foremost, with the people around us. Everything kind of, and Amy Edmondson's work, like there's lots of work around the importance of creating safety and trust in a workplace. And that if we don't do that first, it's really hard to scaffold after that.
Exactly. I love the metaphor. It's exactly right.
So, Chris, how does your framework, you think, kind of speak to some of the things that we're talking about? What do you bring unique? What could you share with our listeners around your framework that might help with these things?
Yeah, so at a high level, I believe that trust, which is, as you were just saying, Mel, like trust and safety are such foundational elements of high-performing teams and cultures. I think that trust is the byproduct of human-centered leadership, and human-centered leadership is the byproduct of what I call ripple effect thinking. And so my work is all about how can we approach our communication, our collaboration, the way that we show up at work through a ripple effect mindset. And there's 5 qualities that I incorporate into a ripple effect mindset: vulnerability, kindness, curiosity, empathy, and humility. And if we can just say, if I have to give tough feedback to someone, if I'm leading a meeting, if someone's coming to me with a big challenge, how can I show up and communicate and approach this through the lens or filter really of these 5 qualities? That's what's going to create a sense of safety and trust and connection. And it's an invitation. I call it polishing the pebble, right? I talk about you are the pebble, you're creating ripples everywhere you go. This is the work that never stops. It's polishing the pebble over and over and over again with these 5 qualities. And so when I do work with leaders and organizations, it's about shifting from what I call a siloed mindset, where you get so focused on your tasks, your goals, your agenda. We're moving a million miles an hour. We're just trying to get our stuff done without considering the broader context or the interconnectedness of our work. And how can we shift to a ripple effect mindset, which is this understanding that your words, your actions, your decisions have far-reaching consequences beyond what we can immediately see. And so that's things like shifting from, in a siloed mindset, making assumptions, to in a ripple effect mindset, seeking the truth. In a siloed mindset, tackling the presenting problem in front of us, and in a ripple effect mindset, we're exploring the root cause. And so like you can think about all these examples, and I've got resources around this. It's just like, how can we shift our thinking from one to the next? And you can just see how, if we show up with a siloed mindset, the kind of negative ripple effects that will ensue. And if we can show up with a ripple effect mindset, the kind of positive impact we can create.
Mhm.
Do you have any stories of any like transformations that you've seen from leaders who've gone through your program?
I think one of the most exciting clients I've been able to work with is a biopharmaceutical company, and they make life-saving drug therapies for cancer patients, and it's individualized cancer therapies. And met them at a conference I was speaking at, and they had just been racing to get their drug approved for the market, right? And for FDA approval. And amazing company, great culture, strong values, but it was sort of like, let's get across the line and get this approval at all costs. And so they were like phenomenal, like innovators and collaborators, but they were sort of like leaving the people in their wake. Like they were not connecting well, they were not collaborating well, there's a bit of fighting over territory. And so they were like, I think we really need to bring this like ripple effect thinking into the business to have like you said, Mel, like a pause and like reset moment, and to have our people, especially cross-functionally, cross-department, connecting with each other, building trust, re-establishing our values. And we did an initial workshop last summer with a group of 25 cross-functional leaders. And now we're replicating that same work with 5 different core departments across the entire company. So we're sort of in the process, but it's amazing to see, like you were saying, Lorin, like there's a lot of command and compliance sort of like coming up, but I'm really hopeful that companies like this are seeing the value and the importance of slowing down to create connection, to create moments that build trust so that they can continue to innovate and collaborate and deliver these life-saving drug therapies for the cancer patients they serve. And I think the coolest thing about this is that the CEO of this, multi-billion-dollar company is advocating for this, right? He's championing the work.
That's everything, right? When
Yeah.
you've got that buy-in from the very top, you can transform a culture. And I think that's ultimately why we do this podcast, because at some point we're going to reach somebody who is a CEO who's going to be, committed to all that. And, sometimes the backslide into something like a command and control, I always kind of make a joke that, our job is like, it's like job security, all the dysfunction that might happen in an organization. And that even happens in good culture organizations as well, that
Mhm.
sometimes we can just lose sight because of that.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think what you're talking about is that it's not an either or though. Like
Mm.
you don't have to sacrifice getting to outcomes. Like when I think about that company you just described, you can still be running fast because the work they do in terms of the outcome, the product, is hugely impactful. You're talking about, individualized cancer treatments. It doesn't kind of get more life and death than that.
Yeah.
Yet that doesn't mean that they have to sacrifice the inner work that each leader needs to do, as well as like the outer impact of thinking about the broader context and what they're solving and how they work together. It
Mm.
it doesn't have to be either or, it's an and. And I think your story really beautifully demonstrated that you can do both. Like I'm assuming they're on track to getting to their business outcomes at the same time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it does not have to be either or. And I think the resistance sometimes is, well, we don't have time
Mm.
to do
Mhm.
this. And
Classic.
like,
Mhm.
but the companies that say we don't have time and we're going to do it anyway, that's where you see the return in the long run, right? Because we're so focused on, again, these like short-term wins. That's a siloed mindset. Ripple effect mindset is like long-term relationships, long-term success. And so if we can pause for a 2, 3 hour workshop to reset and connect your leaders and realign, you're going to be moving way faster and way more efficiently and with less damage if we can do that up front.
Mhm.
What I'm appreciating about how you just talked about how like companies will say, I don't have, excuse me, enough time, is I'm wondering, do you notice that in the course of the work you do they start to think about time differently? Like rather than it being something scarce that I have to jam a bunch of things into, rather I have this time, what am I going to fill it with? Right. So like what are the priorities that I'm going to put into the 8 or 10 hours a day I have?
Yeah.
Do you notice that the leaders who come to this work more readily have a different way of thinking about how they prioritize their time?
I think so. Like I just worked with a hotel, like resort and spa, like all of their 48 supervisors, managers, and executives who similarly, like they just opened 7 months ago, kind of a new team racing 100 miles an hour to get things, unpacking mirrors, like the whole thing, like everyone's doing everyone's job. And and it's very unusual, I think, and they shared this with me, for like a hospitality group at one resort to be investing the kind of money they are in their leadership. And,
Hmm.
we had all 48 of the leaders on that property in a room for an hour and a half when the resort was still running. And any other resort might be like, we can't afford to do that. But the general managers, they're saying like, we believe that if we can support you and invest in your leadership, and we've got some great future leaders in this room, then that's going to pay off in the long run. So again, you've got the head person kind of championing this, showing great leadership about their investment in their people. You show that they're willing to take the time to do it. And so yeah, they come in with a mindset to say this is a priority, and they let everybody know that it's a priority.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there's a two things, research I know that says for every $1 a company spends on leadership development, they get $7 in return. That seems to
Mhm.
be the data out there. And then of course there's the old joke. You see these in little cartoon sketches all the time, and the one person going, "What if we train them and they leave?" And then the other
Mhm.
person says, "What if we don't train them and they stay?"
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I
Interesting.
really resonates with me that, the investment is never wasted dollars or
So I'm curious, Chris. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your kind of your process with people? Because what you're really talking about is some fundamental um, mindset and behavior change, right? Or even transformation, right? So we all know that that's more than a even a full day or 2 days or a week of training,
Mhm.
right? So how do, from your perspective and in your framework, how does that get really infused and integrated into an organization's culture?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
Mhm.
Um, you're right, it's not something that can happen in an hour or even in a full day. Um, Having said that, a lot of my work is going to speak at a conference for an hour to inspire people and to give them to have them really think or feel something different so that they go and do something different. And to me, there's a lot of impact in that. And in many cases, if we're talking about like an association or an industry conference, we're talking to people who are represented from very different companies, right? In the
Mhm.
case of working with the resort I was at, that's leaders in one business. So when I am in one business, a corporate, someone's hiring me, then I typically start with that sort of like hour-long keynote to get people, here's the ideas, here's the message, kind of let that sink in. And like 6 weeks later, we do a 3-hour workshop that now we're taking the framework, the leadership model that I have, the ripples of impact, the 4 pillars in the middle, the ripple effect mindset, and how do I map out my own leadership ripple effect? And that's kind of the process, is like having each leader actually define and strengthen their own leadership ripple effect, because it's partly building awareness and then also partly bringing a sort of scaffolding or framework to
Mhm.
say, uh, here's the legacy impact I want to make. Here's the current ripples of impact and influence that I have. And here's how I'm going to go ahead and show up this way. Here's how I'm going to change. Here's how I'm going to work with my team. Here's the questions I'm going to ask to make this actually happen. And in some cases where I'm really embedded with an organization like this biopharmaceutical company, that's just like an ongoing, we're doing workshops with different teams. There may be one-on-one, touch points with different leaders, but it kind of depends on what the need is and what the client is looking for.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool, thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, Chris, when, some of the things that you're talking about, I'm sure you're aware of, Daniel Kahneman's work, System One thinking, Systems Two thinking, that we're just kind of, System One, go, 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 and System Two is that stop a moment, contemplative, think longer. And I'm just kind of wondering, I'd like to circle back for a minute. When we talked kind of at the beginning, we're talking about there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's just, there's always stress at work. That I don't think is ever going to go away. But volatility and uncertainty can kind of come and go. Especially when we think about how what we all went through with COVID, et cetera, and so forth. Is, so when we're all at our worst moments, when we are stressed out, when we're not doing well, um, what, how do we try to, how can we remember your framework, or how can we remember our impact? Because sometimes we're just in, like, for the lack of words, survival mode.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like um, I'm just sort of reflecting on this because Lauren, you and I talked a little bit about this, but I've had some recent experiences where speaking at conferences, I've had people who hear my story about coming out and sort of like object to the fact that I'm even talking about that because they view being gay as immoral. And
Mm.
why would you talk about a controversial issue at a conference when like they're likening it to things like abortion and climate change and gun control? And it's been really actually hard for me because
Mm.
I am being challenged to say, do I change my message? Do I be less me? Do I
Mm.
uh, sort of take these clues from people in the audience to say, gosh, is this not right? And I feel in my chest now just talking about it, like there's this sense of real like vulnerability. And so in many ways, like I'm experiencing what you're describing is like how
Mm-hmm.
to show up in the face of something that feels really tough. And, thankfully, I think this is where you tap your network, your partner, your coaches, your loved ones to reflect back to you like your own brilliance, right? Uh, and I think it's just a reminder to continue to be vulnerable. And that is what, for me, like, even though it feels challenging, the fact that I know that it's creating some like resistance and some tension, one, is a good thing. And two, it just makes it even more vulnerable for me to be out there and sharing my story. And so I'm just sharing this as an example because I think it's for whatever the situation or whatever you're going through, if you just feel like you're kind of just getting through it and just trying to survive, how can you just really get honest with how you're feeling
Mm-hmm.
and how you can bring your best, most vulnerable, authentic self to the moment? Because I think that's how you're going to have the biggest impact. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's just kind of what
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I go
Mm-hmm.
back to your story, Chris, at the very, very beginning. Oh, by the way, thanks for sharing that.
Mm.
I love that story. I've heard it before, and it was very impactful and powerful for me, especially as a parent. With kids myself who
Hmm.
are LGBTQ and golfers as well. Hey, what a coincidence. Yeah, little plug for my daughter who like did well yesterday, her match. Yay.
Oh, nice. I love it.
But I'm thinking about like I'm going back to your story and the positive impact that your dad, who, at that moment, and at some level, if you think about it, we're leaders for our children, right? Those of us that have children, or maybe nieces or nephews, or other younger kids that we might be mentoring at some point. As adults, we are leaders to the younger generation, and I really was struck by the fact that you had just had this wonderful, to me, positive, ultimately scary at first, but positive experience with a leader in some ways, right? Who surprised you. And I often think about like impact and who's impacted me. And I tend to kind of drum up negative experiences more than positive experiences. And I know that there's science and research about that. And I think the question where I'm going with this is how do we also take the negative experiences and have them help us as well?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, as some of you or maybe all of you are coaches in some capacity, right? And probably
Mm-hmm.
have or do
Mm-hmm.
work with coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And as a coach myself, although I do less coaching now, I've always had coaches through sports, through life, you name it. And so I'm very fortunate to work with a brilliant woman now. Her name is Mary, uh, and she really helped me remember that things like this are happening for you, not to you. How can you view these experiences as a gift for something
Mm-hmm.
greater? What is the opportunity here? How can you turn this catalyst moment, although it feels negative, into a catapult moment and make it something even greater? And so I think that's the invitation for all of us, is like when you have those negative moments, how do we turn it into something amazing? Like I was, you know, pushed out of my last corporate job essentially, and that didn't feel good, but it was the catalyst for me to create everything that I've done in this business, and I
Mm-hmm.
never would have done it otherwise. And
Mm-hmm.
so that, again, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, how is this happening for me and not to me?
Mm. Yeah,
I,
like he,
I
what fire, sorry, Naomi, like fire
go
can
ahead.
form steel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The heat experiences can be the
Mm,
thing that allow us to stretch and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And Naomi, I know you want to jump in, but just one thing I
It's okay.
wanted to
Okay.
add to what Chris was talking about is, you know, also this importance of us each having our North Star. Oftentimes we, when we're going through changes or challenges, it can be so helpful to think about like, what's the legacy that I want here? How do I want to show
Mm-hmm.
up? Who am I in this context, in this world, in this moment? And like vision and purpose aren't just for companies, they're also for us as people. Like, who are we? Who do we want to be? Who do we want to be remembered as?
Mm-hmm.
And when it's hard, to be able to go back into those moments and anchor back into that, this
Mm-hmm.
is who I want to be. This is how I want to show up in this moment. Sorry, Naomi.
Mhm. No, that's fine. That's perfect. And what I'm just going to add one other thing to what you're talking about, which is our core values and our core principles, because that's what gets challenged also in those moments where you're standing up and showing up in a way that is authentic and genuine for you, and it's not landing because of other people's senses, their values and their principles, right? Really. And so what, what do you do, right? And so really being able to vision, purpose, and core values, right? Those are kind of what keep us centered and keep us grounded in this always, but especially in the times we're living in now, where there is a lot of that polarity and some people are feeling more emboldened to speak up in certain kinds of ways. And also I wanted to say that lest anyone feel like in those moments, if they back down, they're doing something wrong. I just feel like, no, you have to give yourself some grace, right? Because you might decide in this, you know what? Man, I really need this job. I need this money. And what I can do is know that I keep my core. I have to do this because of whatever circumstances, or I choose not to, that's okay too, right? You don't always have to choose what other people would view as the courageous
Yeah.
Courage takes
behavior.
forms, right?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
important. That's an important
Yeah,
point, Naomi.
I
You
agree.
know,
So
because you might choose, Chris, at some point to say, I'm not going to go to Mississippi and give this talk in this kind of way, not
Mhm.
to stereotype Mississippi, because it could be upstate New York also. But you know what I mean? That we get, we get to choose. And I think that that's also really, really key. And you brought this up before too, Chris, that you get to choose, right? As a leader, you're making choices. As a person in the world, you're making choices.
And that makes me, Naomi, you're sparking something for me, and what Chris has been saying too is that also sometimes, and and I mentioned this earlier, how the people who come to our classes or come to listen are people who already want to improve, but the people who really need to hear our message are the ones who are pushing back, right? The people who are pushing back really, really need to hear the message. I also want to share Chris, you may have heard this quote before, but I think you're going to like it, especially being a former sport. Well, you're probably still as an athlete of playing golf, I hope. But Nelson Mandela, he has a quote that's like one of my favorites now, and he would say, "I never lose. I either win or I learn."
Mm.
And so that has kind of become my mantra now, especially being a solopreneur as well. So we have one last, so okay, now with Naomi and all her, what she just had to say, now I want to go start talking about authenticity. And I know, Chris, you would
Mhm.
have some amazing things to share with us about that. So maybe we'll have to have you back again to talk more about that.
Mhm.
So one last question for our listeners today. What's one thing actionable that someone can do now that they've just listened to all of this and they're like, their heads are spinning because they've heard so many great things. What would you like to leave with our listeners? One thing that they could do today, right after listening to this.
Well, I shared some data on the power of human connection in work and how it drives not only like a sense of safety and innovation and collaboration, but also profitability for businesses. And so I hear this question, I'm like, oh, what's like a really rich like leadership tip to do something like in my next one-on-one or something? But fundamentally, I believe like the most powerful thing that anyone can do, and the tip I'm going to give is to give an unnecessary and unexpected kindness to somebody else. Uh,
Mm.
in the work that I do, I have these postcards that maybe I think that was part of the talk that you saw.
Yes.
Yes, yes, I
And
remember postcards. Yeah.
actually I've got one here, and it's on the front. It says, "I just wanted to let you know," and on the back it says, "You created a ripple effect in my life when you dot dot dot," and you fill it in. And taking this moment of pause, like during the keynotes and workshops that I do, it's so powerful to see the types of people that that are writing to, the things that people write about. Thank you for believing me when I didn't believe in myself, and thank you for giving me this job opportunity when I didn't feel ready for it, and thank you for being there in my hardest moment. Let's do something unexpected and delightful and unnecessary that's kind to somebody else, and what kind of ripple effects that might create for them to do that to somebody else. And I think if we can all do that at scale, like, we start to shape the world a little bit better.
Oh, I love that. Random acts
What
of
a
kindness.
right. Beautiful. That's a beautiful way to bring
Beautiful.
closure to our conversation. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you,
you all.
Chris. We have loved having you on. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and with our listeners and sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And
Appreciate it.
we'll have you back at some point. We say that to all our guests. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to figure something out. One
real
of these days,
thank
we'll
you.
have to be innovative in some way. So again, thanks, Chris, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Thank y'all.
Bye.
Like what? Like
Hmm.
That was
how do you follow up with that?
Hmm.
awesome.
Hmm. Yeah. Very inspirational.
Very
Very,
cool.
you know, I'm going to do what he said today.
I
I'm going
am
to
I
do it.
too.
do those random. I occasionally
Mm-hmm.
do those random acts of kindness, and as he spoke, it's like I don't do them enough. I don't do them way enough. Um,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think what
I can make
really,
time to do it.
I think the fact that he shared a very personal, vulnerable story really sits with me as well. And I think that, I think something that, I often share with a lot of leaders that the more vulnerable that you can be sometimes, that that makes you more human and more real. And I think when you have people under you who see you as being a real person, I think that that's important.
Well, the research shows that if you want to build trust, you have to go first with being vulnerable. Like we think that trust is something that we give, it's earned, but
Yeah.
it's earned by how we show up. It's earned by how we are vulnerable first, because that
Mhm.
invites the other person. It tells them it's safe, right? That we're safe. And so it's like reorientating, I'm always struck when people say, well, they have to earn my trust. Well, actually, you have to demonstrate a willingness to trust first in order
Hmm.
for that to happen. And the way you do that, Lorin, to your
Yeah.
point, is that by being open and vulnerable,
Hmm.
Yeah.
signals to them
Yeah,
that they're not.
I really agree with all of this. And so for me, this is a yes and the and is I think we all always have to be, well, it's a it's a fact of life, it's a reality, but aware of power differentials.
Mhm.
Because,
Absolutely.
right, not
Yeah,
everybody walks through the world in the same kind of ways. And
right.
so, the invitation to be vulnerable needs to be an invitation
And a choice.
because, right, and a choice because it's just not the same for everyone in the world.
And I think what
So,
I'm, yeah, and I think what I mean, and I see what you're saying, Naomi, and a yes, and I'm agreeing with
hmm.
you. I think when I'm speaking in the context of vulnerability, I'm also thinking about those under you in some ways, right? If you're a leader, and then if you're managing up, I think it turns into something a little bit different, right? Are you allowed to be vulnerable to those that you report to, as opposed to the other way around? And I think that's kind of where I was going with that. And I also don't mean vulnerability in weakness. And I also don't mean vulnerability in abilities to, be visionary, right? And to be inspirational and to give people hope. You can still be all of that, I think, because we're as humans, we're complex,
Hmm.
I'm also struck by that vulnerability that we also, that self-awareness to recognize that our whatever comfort level we might have with vulnerability might also be different for
Hmm.
someone else.
Yeah.
And so their
Hmm.
demonstration of vulnerability might look might might look less, I'm going to put that in air quotes, to us, but to them that is like
Hmm.
that is them stretching, for example, or them
Yes.
feeling like taking a
Hmm.
risk.
Like
Because to
Hmm.
them,
Chris
that
did
is
with his
their
dad,
Hmm.
right? Like Chris did with his dad. He made himself vulnerable almost to a pressure point, right? And then when, he did that, all of a sudden their relationship changed and improved as well. And I think that's
Hmm.
impactful for all of us. And Chris continues to be vulnerable, with his message and the fact that he still gets out there, I think is admirable.
mm,
Hmm.
mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh yeah, the
Yeah.
courage.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And speaking of vulnerability, I never have to worry about you guys because I know you guys all got my backs too.
Yep. Best friends at work,
Best friends at
right?
work. It's
Hmm.
always nice that, I love the fact that, the three of us can agree, we can disagree, and we have the high trust with us too, and I like that. And I love the fact that we get to do this all the time and meet people, and as
Mm.
always,
It
love you
made me
guys.
think when Chris came on and he said like the name of this podcast made him think about
Mhm.
best friends and is like we're all entrepreneurs in our own right and we have collaborations that we do. This is like one of the collaborations that we do each do and we have other ones. And it just made me think about the importance when you're working as an entrepreneur or a solo entrepreneur of finding different pockets of collaboration for yourself where um, you might have that kind of best friend at work connection, right? That
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't look the way it does if you work for someone else or in a
Hmm.
formal
Yeah.
traditional organization, but that you
Hmm.
how do you recreate
Yeah.
um, that sense of community and collaboration in the work that you do have. I was just
Agreed.
I thought as I was talking.
Agreed. Yeah. That's been on my mind this week, Mel. Um, because sometimes when you feel as a solopreneur, especially for me, and I think maybe for Lauren, you too, well, you've been at it longer, so you're a little more tethered in it. Like my connection to this this solopreneur is still being established.
Right.
And so it's, I sometimes get unmoored in that
Right.
process. And it's what helps is connecting with other people.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And thus our
Here we are.
ripples. Our
And that,
ripples.
yeah, and that's ripples,
Hoping
right?
we're doing some rippling ourselves, right?
Hmm.
On that note, guys, I think we should sign off for our listeners. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. And just thank you. Have a great, wonderful rest of the day.
Thank
And
you.
can't wait for us
Thank
to
you.
get back at it again.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Bye.
guys. Thank you so very much for spending some time with us. We hope you got something out of this episode. Now, if you liked it, do us a huge favor and take a moment and hit the like button. Did you do it? Thanks. Now, are you curious about who is next? Well, then please subscribe to the podcast. It'll help our channel so very much if you do choose to subscribe. Because, of course, the more subscriptions we get, the more opportunities we have to scale up our production, the types of guests we can have, and overall improve on what we can do to make the experience you want and might need. I feel like I sound like a public radio station fundraiser right now. Well, I guess that makes sense because we want you to come back again. So hit that subscribe button. It's super easy. Thanks so much, and we can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of Best Friends at Work.